Hey loves, it's Britt, and in this video I'm talking about Saturn opposite to the Ascendant in Synastry, or this can also be applied to Saturn in the 7th house in Synastry, although if it is opposite to the Ascendant by degree, this will be like doubled or tripled even. So it just makes it that much more powerful. But this is for both Saturn in the 7th and Saturn opposite to the Ascendant in Synastry. So this one does tend to be very binding because Saturn in Synastry, it's kind of like the glue that sticks us with people, whether we like it or not. So it's not always the happiest of unions when we have a whole lot of Saturn going on, but it does tend to make us feel, seriously committed to the person, because we get this sense that there's something faded and we're learning particular life lessons. So with this opposition, so Saturn opposite the ascendant, that means Saturn is conjunct to the descendant. The Saturn person can really feel like it's a few things going on here. They feel judgment of the way that the ascendant person or the house person acts. They can definitely see in them qualities that they find immature. But at the same time, there's qualities in them too that they sense that actually, ooh, I could use some of that. Like, for example, a Saturn in Pisces might find a Virgo ascendant person overly analytical and logical, and they might judge that and be like, oh, they're not as spiritual as me, or they're not as emotionally intelligent as me, like the Saturn in Pisces. But then at the same time, they're like, well, but I could really use some more of that um, analytical ability, since I don't have that ability to think without emotion. So it's a little bit of that. And I share that example because I have Saturn in Pisces, and actually my boyfriend has a Virgo ascendant opposite to my Saturn. And that's kind of the dynamic. So it's definitely one that there is a lot of judginess, and there can be definitely some difficulties. The Saturn person definitely feels like their issues are brought up in the relationship. And see, that's the thing with heavily Saturn dominant synastry, is that the relationship doesn't act as like an escape from the life issues. The relationship actually brings up those issues to the surface, for better or for worse. So you really do learn, as the Saturn person, you learn a lot about what is your karma and what is your wound that you're working on, dealing with in this lifetime. And the ascendant person is definitely bringing that up. Now, I have seen it in some relationships where the Saturn person can end up being kind of parental, but in a very harsh way towards the ascendant person. So that's something that you want to look out for. Now, you're probably going to see that more in people that are more heavily Saturnian. Like, this contact isn't going to make someone who doesn't really have a very strong Saturn all of a sudden act like the cold Saturn daddy. It just brings up the Saturn in them, whatever that may be. But in people that are heavily Saturnian, a lot of Capricorn, maybe Saturn and Capricorn, we could see that they, towards the ascendant person, they could seem very cold. They could seem like the judgment is not coming from love. They can actually, you could even see them being maybe sort of abusive in some situations if there's other Pluto stuff going on, just from like their judgment of the person. So like in this synastry aspect, or this house overlay, the Saturn person, and this is going to be a lot stronger if it's the opposition to the ascendant, but the Saturn person really um, feels like they have like the advice or the Saturn energy that this person needs, and they want to give it to them. And sometimes to be on the receiving end of that, the ascendant person or the house person, they don't really want to be judged all the time. They don't think there's anything wrong with how they're acting. So, why does the Saturn person always have to be so critical and, always judging, right? So that's something to look out for as the Saturn person, is that you can come off more judging than you mean to with this overlay or this specific aspect. So specifically for Saturn in the seventh house, though, too, the Saturn person is in a sense grounding the house person's relationship energy. So the house person can really feel like, this is someone who I see myself committing to. So it is often going to be an overlay that shows up in relationships that do become committed. It's probably not enough in itself, like if it's the only Saturn contact, to make a relationship like extremely long term, but it definitely gets people thinking, like, especially the house person, well, oh, this is someone I could see myself with, the way that they partner, the way that they are dealing with their life lessons. This is someone responsible. This is someone who, yeah, seems like worthy of my partnership energy. Now, it actually doesn't have to be just partnership in a romantic sense. This can often show up in, other types of relationships, business relationships, and usually you're going to see the house person or the ascendant person feeling like the Saturn person is like solid. They're someone who they can see themselves like collaborating with in the business sense, or taking advice from, even if the Saturn person isn't acting too judgy. Yeah, they can definitely like look at the Saturn person as like a wise elder in a way, when we have Saturn in the seventh house overlay. And, it is actually like out of, the overlays, the angular placements of Saturn, right? So Saturn in someone's first, Saturn in someone's fourth, Saturn in someone's seventh, and Saturn in someone's 10th are going to be the most, I don't want to say strongly felt, because like someone's Saturn in your 8th or 12th, like that's strongly felt too, but it does tend to show with these angular overlays like more significance to the relationship, like as far as the Saturn function goes. So the house person is going to feel like the Saturn person has a significant impact on them and the way that they partner. So like they could end up learning a lot about relationships. Like, for example, maybe the Saturn person is like, the first relationship that they've really been committed in on a deep level. And it's definitely a learning experience. It's not an easy relationship. It's not going to be all sunshine and roses. Hopefully you have other Jupiter contacts or fifth house contacts, or lighter stuff going on to balance kind of the heaviness of this aspect or of this overlay, which usually you will. But it definitely gets both people thinking like, there's something to work out here. There's something worth working on here. Like, so, like if you're going to break up or something, they could feel like, I just don't want to break up because I still feel like there's something we're working on. There's something, yeah, it's like a committed partnership energy when you have this aspect or this overlay. It really is, one of those aspects that shows commitment even when it's hard, and it shows kind of a seriousness in the way they relate to each other. On some level, it can even, in a romantic relationship, it can even be like in a business partnership. There's like a serious level of devotion where it's like, we're going to be devoted even when it's hard, and through all the ups and downs and other tumultuous aspects, and like you have this aspect and you want to stay in it, and you feel like there's something worth working on. And the Saturn person feels like, they are learning their life's lessons through this person. They can be, like I said, judgy of them. And, they might get to a point where it's like, well, you're just not up to my Saturn standards in whatever way that is. And then that's when the relationship will part. It'll probably be the Saturn person who says, you know what, like, you're just not, if they get too judgy, they might just feel like, you know what, the ascendant or the house person isn't quite mature enough for them. That's kind of what they'll feel like, right? Or is they're not as serious as them. They're not as committed to what their Saturn is, right? And that can be when it's really over, but it can take a lot to get to that point for the Saturn person, because they really do see in the ascendant person and the house person like what it is that they need for balancing as well, because you can become very crusty and very like overly enmeshed in your Saturn energy, where the opposition aspect is the aspect of polarity, where there actually is more harmony than with the square, right? Or especially like than with the inconjunct. Like that's even more awkward. So when we have Saturn opposing someone's ascendant, which is really like a huge part of their personality, if anything, it's the most outward, the most noticeable kind of approach and like primal soul path that they've taken on from their moment of birth. So when we're having that, it's very unavoidable, this contact. Like you're going to constantly be feeling this, and it really is good for the Saturn person to like open them up to this other side of them that they've maybe repressed, or that maybe doesn't come natural, right? And that will really end up like bringing wholeness to them. And then it's the exact same way with the ascendant person, except in a different way, like because now it's Saturn is opposing their ascendant, so it's like they're balancing their personality and the way that they act, because sometimes the way that they act is going to be ineffective if they are too far on the ascendant side. Like sometimes our ascendant sign, we can kind of go on overload too, where we can over identify with it, especially if we have like a lot of planets in the first, or like a sun conjunct ascendant or whatever, like where we can like really be imbalanced and just be like to like tunnel vision on that sign. And then the Saturn person is really going to level them out and ground them. And like, that's where we can see this aspect being really good, when both people are open to that kind of, wholeness that this aspect can bring. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. It's serious, it's committed, it's shows a deep fated karmic attraction. It's a very, very powerful Saturn synastry aspect or house overlay to have. Like I said, probably Saturn in the seventh like could even be the strongest, even out of the angular houses. So yeah, what else? Let me think about this one. Yeah, I feel like that's pretty much it. That's how I've experienced it. Definitely does show up in a lot of synastries of committed relationships. I think it's a good place, Saturn being exalted in Libra, ruling the seventh house. It does actually kind of work well to have Saturn in the seventh house in a committed relationship, because it does kind of fit there. And yeah, so yeah, I'd love to know your experiences of this overlay or this aspect. If you've had it in your synastry, let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. Keep your requests coming in the comments, and we'll talk soon. Okay, bye.